Hi, welcome to this STAIR Tailored. I'm Sarah Powell from the University of Texas at Austin, and we are focused on word problem instruction, and right now we're focused on the difference schema. Now there are 6 schema that we regularly see used in word problems across the elementary and middle school grades. And these are the 6 schemas, and there's STAIR Tailored about each of them, but in this STAIR Tailored, we're focused on the difference schema. Now, what is the difference schema? Let me tell you about it. In a difference schema, we have greater and lesser amounts, and those are compared for a difference. You can think about this as falling on a number line. You have a greater amount and a lesser amount, and you're comparing those for a difference. You could also think about a greater amount and a lesser amount and comparing those for a difference. What is an example of a difference problem? Here's a very classic difference problem. The Brazos River is 840 miles. The Red River is 1,360 miles long. How much longer is the Red River? Or the question might be, how much shorter is the Brazos River? Here we have 2 amounts, and we're comparing those amounts to figure out the difference in those amounts. Now, this is your classic difference problem, but we regularly see difference problems like this one. The Red River is 1,360 miles long. It is 520 miles longer than the Brazos River. How long is the Brazos River? Or that question could be worded like this. The Brazos River is 520 miles shorter than the Red River. If the Brazos River is 840 miles long, how long is the Red River? In each of these stories, we have a greater amount and a lesser amount, and we're comparing those amounts for a difference. Sometimes you're asked about the difference. In this story, you're asked to figure out the lesser amount, and then in this story, you're asked to figure out the greater amount. So lots of different variations here. Now, when we think about our difference problems, it's helpful to have an organizer to organize the information from the difference problem. So, and sometimes you might want to use this difference equation. So here we have the greater amount minus the lesser amount equals the difference. You also might want to use a graphic organizer. Here's a graphic organizer organized vertically, and here's a graphic organizer organized horizontally. I like this graphic organizer right here because then you can see how these numbers fall on a number line. Now, to help students figure out whether it is a difference problem, it's always good to have a prompt. And I'm going to use my gestures to go along with that prompt. So I'm going to ask, are amounts compared for a difference? And I can either hold up a greater amount and a lesser amount, kind of move my hands back and forth there for a difference. You could also show it on a number line, a greater amount and a lesser amount, and are you comparing those amounts for a difference? So let's see how we use all of this information to solve this difference problem right here. Now remember, I always need to employ an attack strategy. Anytime I see a mixture of numbers and words, we are going to use an attack strategy. And the attack strategy I like to use most frequently is UPS check. And I'm going to write it right here so that I remember first I understand, then I make a plan, then I solve, and then I go back and check my work. So let's understand the problem by reading it. Carla buys apples and peaches at the store. The mass of the apples is 724 grams. The mass of the peaches is 471 grams. How much greater in mass, greater is the mass in grams of the apples? So what am I having to figure out here? I'm having to figure out the mass in grams. I'm going to underline grams because I think I want to focus on all of the numbers that deal with grams. And here I'm figuring out how much greater. So I'm going to have to figure out something probably related to the difference. I have an understanding of the problem. I'm going to cross it out so I don't do that again. Now I need to make a plan. And our plan is by schema. And you can ask students the different questions that go along with each schema. So in another STAIR Tailored, we talked about the total schema. So I could ask students, well, in this problem, are parts put together for a total? Or is this a problem where amounts are compared for a difference? Now, students should recognize this as a difference problem because we have 2 amounts and we're comparing those amounts for a difference. So I'm going to solve this with my, my difference equation. So I'll go ahead and write it right here. And then I'm going to use that difference equation to help me organize all of the work from the word problem. So I've got my plan. I'm solving this as a difference problem. Now it's time to solve the problem. I'm going to go back and reread the problem and find the numbers that I need to put into my difference equation. Carla buys apples and peaches. The mass of the apples is 724 grams. 724 is a number. I'm going to use that in my word problem. 724 tells me about the apples, and I have to figure out how much greater is the mass of the apples. So 724 is the greater amount, so I'll write that underneath the G for the greater amount. And the mass of the peaches is 471 grams. 471 tells me about the peaches. That's the lesser amount, so I'll go ahead and write that underneath L. And then the question asks, well, how much greater? The question asks us here about the difference. So I'm going to mark a question mark here under difference. You can also use a line. I could use a G for greater if I wanted to do that. Lots of different ways that you could mark that. Now I'm going to put in my symbols here, the minus sign and the equal sign, and now it's time to solve the problem. I'm going to move over here and do some math. 724 minus 471. I'll do a little bit of regrouping here. Oh, I didn't have to do any regrouping there. Oh my gosh, I'm ahead of myself. I'm going to scratch that out and try this again. All right, 4 minus 1 is 3. I was thinking about that regrouping in the tens. I was getting a little bit confused there. 12 minus 7 is 5, and 6 minus 4 is 2. So the difference, or the question mark, is the same as 253. And what would be a good label for that? We're talking about grams. I underlined that earlier, coming back to it now. And so I solved that the apples weigh 253 more grams than the peaches. So we solved the problem. Now finally, we want to check our work. How can we check our work? Well, let's see, I could do 724 minus 253. Hopefully that is the same as 471. I could do as 253 plus 471, and hopefully that would add to 724. Lots of different ways to check the work. I only need to do one of those ways, but it's always important to make sure that my answer is reasonable and makes sense. So notice in this difference problem, we took our attack strategy and we combined it with thinking about the difference schema. So the attack strategy works together with the schema to help students work through this entire word problem. I'm going to erase my work now, and then I'll be back to solve a different type of difference problem. Okay, so let's look at this difference problem. I see a mix of numbers and words, so I'm going to use my attack strategy. The attack strategy that I'm going to use right now is UPS check. I need to understand, plan, solve, and check my work. I'm going to understand this problem by reading it. Diego has 26 more pens than pencils. He has 11 pencils and 5 erasers. How many pens does he have? So what do I have to think about in this story? I have to figure out how many pens does he have. And it seems that I'm also thinking about those pencils. So I may want to come over here and underline pencils just like that. Again, you don't usually want to underline more than 1, 2, maybe 3 things at the most. Don't underline whole sentences. Don't underline the whole problem. That doesn't really help you focus in on what's important. So in this story, I'm focusing in on the pens and the pencils. Now I've got to make a plan. Is this a total problem where parts are put together for a total? Or is this a difference problem where amounts are compared for a difference? Well, let's see, more pens than pencils. I'm comparing amounts here. This is a difference problem. And this time, I'm going to use my difference graphic organizer to help me organize the word information from this word problem. I kind of like to draw my graphic organizer like that. Like a few dashes over there. That looks pretty good. I'm going to have my greater amount here and my lesser amount, and the difference amount will go in this rectangle right there. So my plan is to solve this as a difference problem. Now let's solve it by putting in the important information into our graphic organizer. Diego has 26 more pens than pencils. 26. Now I would ask students, does 26 tell me about the number of pens? No. Does 26 tell me about the number of pencils? No. What does 26 tell us? 26 tells us the difference between the pens and the pencils. So here in this story, we are given the difference. The difference is 26. Now, if there are more pens than pencils, and I'm going to go ahead and mark this, pens is going to be my greater amount, and pencils is going to be my lesser amount because there's more pens than pencils. That's going to help me figure out how to arrange the rest of my graphic organizer. Now, Diego has 11 pencils. Now, what did we say? 11 talks about the lesser amount. I'm going to check off 11, and I'm going to put that here to figure out the lesser amount. Diego has 5 erasers. Do we need to know about erasers when we're talking about pens and pencils? No, we don't need to know that. I'm just going to go ahead and draw a line through that. That is my irrelevant information. I'm going to ignore it the rest of the time. Then the question is, how many pens does Diego have? We have to figure out the greater amount, so we have to figure out the number of pens. Now, how could I solve this problem? I see that I need to add 26 and 11. So I'll do my math right here. 26 plus 11 is 37. So my question mark is 37. And 37 is telling me about what? Is it telling me about the pens or the pencils? Well, I know the lesser amount was the pencils. I was figuring out the greater amount. So Diego has 37 pens. Now, how can we check this work? First, I solved the problem. How can we check it? We could do 37 minus 11, make sure that equals 26. We could do 37 minus 26, make sure that equals 11. Lots of different ways to check our work, but we just want to always make sure that we have checked our work. So with this difference problem, we used our attack strategy and we used our difference schema via the graphic organizer to help us solve this problem to figure out that Diego has 37 pens. So in difference problems, we have a greater amount and a lesser amount, and we're comparing those for a difference. And I hope you'll tune into some other STAIR Tailoreds where you see how we use the other schemas to set up and solve word problems.